The scientific revolution looms large as the real origin of both the modern world and modern mentality. This revolution outshines everything since the rise of Christianity and reduces the Renaissance and Reformation to the rank of mere episodes, said the noted historian Herbert Butterfield.
Burckhardt considers the origin of modern science to be in the Renaissance science. In fact, by saying so, he was trying to establish a continuity between the scientific developments of the 16th century and the 17th century, a work which was initiated by the likes of Copernicus and Galilei. This found its epitome during the 17th century with the scientific revolution. In fact, in the Renaissance, we can't say that there were many scientific discoveries which were made. A few scientific discoveries were made primarily in the field of astronomy and anatomy, which laid the foundations of the future scientific revolution in the 17th century.
The scientific revolution was a period when new ideas in astronomy, anatomy, and other sciences led to a rejection of doctrines that had prevailed since antiquity through the Middle Ages. It laid the foundation of modern science.
Another very important aspect of the Renaissance and its influence on the modern scientific development was this, that the role that religion played, both positive and negative, in the evolution of scientific thought.
Historians believe that the period of scientific revolution began with the publication of two works in 1543. On the Revolution of Heavenly Bodies by Nicholas Copernicus and Fabric of the Human Body by Andreas Vesalius. Vesalius's book is a compilation of the lectures given by him at the University of Padua, where he dissected corpses to illustrate his discourses.
In this book, there was very nice, very beautiful woodcut illustration of the human anatomy. And also, we find that in this book, for the first time, you come across what is known as medical iconoclasm. Now, Vesalius's scientific revolution, or Vesalius's contribution to the scientific revolution, was not so much in the fact that he, tried to represent the human anatomy in a very natural or lifelike way. But where he actually differed from the previous scholars was this, that he actually challenged the authority of Aristotle. He challenged the authority of Aristotle and tried to prove Aristotle wrong and himself right. Previously, even where Galen is concerned, we find that the knowledge of human anatomy is actually something which was perceived from animals. No one actually went into dissecting the human body. So again, a new beginning is being made by Vesalius when he is dissecting the human body, and he is trying to make a correct assessment of the anatomy of the human body.
Fabrica revolutionized our understanding of our own bodies. It rejected Galen's worst errors, that the great blood vessels originated from the liver.
Paracelsus, he introduced what is called a very important aspect of medicine. He introduced iatrochemistry. Iatrochemistry, which was important in the production of drugs and chemicals, which again went a long way in the development of the medical sciences. These developments in any way, specifically the developments in the field of medicine, specifically the developments in the field of the developments in the field of the knowledge about the human anatomy, did that change or did that bring about any positive changes in the medical field as far as men were concerned? Actually, not much. The medicines did not help the men of the Renaissance much. Because one thing one must understand, that these developments were guided by other things. By other things, I mean the political scenario of that time, the economic scenario of the time, the cultural, the social, and the religious scenario of this time. So there had to be an acceptability among the greater mass of the people regarding these developments. But this did not actually happen so much during the time of the Renaissance.
William Harvey was apprehensive of how the world would react to his new findings. He wrote, "Doctrine once sown strikes deep its root, and respect for antiquity influences all men. Still, the die is cast, and my trust is in my love of truth and the candor of cultivated minds." Copernicus's treatise refuted Ptolemy's hypothesis on the motion of celestial bodies in cycles and epicycles. His book was written in 6 volumes. In these 6 volumes, he argued that the observed back and forth motion of the planets in the sky could only be explained if we accepted the fact that both the Earth and the other planets moved round the Sun. Thus, Copernicus displaced the Earth from the center of the universe and presented to us a heliocentric universe.
ম্যাম রেনেসার যুগে যে এই বিজ্ঞান চর্চাটা এর প্রতি চার্চের দিক থেকে কোনো বিরোধিতা কি এসেছিল?
When Copernicus published his book, the heliocentric hypothesis was something which the people did not actually give much importance to. And it was only later, it was much later, with the discovery of the telescope and even later with Kepler, that the church actually realized that the importance of the earth was being relegated to the background and the sun was coming to the foreground. And that meant that so long the importance of the earth and the people of the earth and the whole concept of the earth as the center of the universe, the primacy of the earth would be relegated to the background and the sun would come to the fore. Here the church objected, because so long it was believed that the earth was the most important object in the whole universe. Now, with the sun becoming the most important object, the church obviously objected to it. But not during the time of Copernicus. It was much later, because at the time Copernicus came up with his theory of heliocentricity, the commentators or the people who actually mattered did not pay much attention to this and thought that this was actually not very important.
Interestingly, 3 decades before he published his treatise, Copernicus had distributed to a few friends an anonymous manuscript called Commentariolus, or Little Commentary. Being a clergyman himself, he had anticipated the wrath of the church. Perhaps in an attempt to ward off the wrath of the church, Copernicus eventually dedicated his treatise to Pope Paul III. The ideas propounded by Copernicus were taken forward in leaps and bounds by Galileo Galilei, Johannes Kepler, and of course, Isaac Newton.
One of the major areas which now has come within the realm of studies of the historians of science is the study of occult sciences during the Renaissance. Something which was considered to be unscientific has now entered into the field of study, because it was the study of the occult sciences during the period of the Renaissance which actually laid emphasis on observation and experimentation, something which was taken up by the proponents of the modern scientific revolution or the scientific revolution in the 17th century. What is important to remember regarding the influence of the Renaissance science in modern scientific development is this, that the critiques of this what should you say, the perception that the Renaissance did have a significant influence in the development of modern science is this, that during the Renaissance there was an inordinate stress on scholasticism. Scholasticism, which was introduced in the Middle Ages, became a very important subject in the university curriculum by the 16th century. And the scholars are of the opinion that this stringent norms which were set forth by scholasticism, it was mainly based on texts, mainly based on the Aristotelian traditions. And this sort of acted as an impediment in the way of scientific knowledge, or in the way of observation and experiment, which were the two most important things in the 17th century scientific development. But by the time you come to the 1960s, and especially what is known as the Yates thesis by Frances Yates, she undertook research, and she says that this is not a very correct assessment of the role of the Renaissance on the scientific development of the 17th century, or earlier, say, the 16th century. She says that something that we have already, spoken about before. She says that the occult sciences, that is astrology, magic, alchemy, there was a profound interest in these during the time of the Renaissance.
Rudolph III, Holy Roman Emperor, sponsored various alchemists. The quest of the alchemists was primarily for three things: transmutation of common metals into precious metals, a panacea or an elixir of life, a universal solvent. Through this quest, they not only discovered many elements, but also discovered patterns in which elements combined to form various compounds.
But scholars like Charles Smith says that Aristotelian traditions always did not mean to say that it always did not prove to be an impediment or obstacle in the path of the scientific revolution. For example, the Aristotelian tradition helped in the development of the biological sciences. In fact, it helped a person like William Harvey, who you all know is very important for the discovery of the circulation of blood in the human body, something which was started actually by the Renaissance, the people during the Renaissance. There was also development in medicine, because you find that there was this adaptation of Hippocrates, of Galen, and then you find that the Renaissance, I won't call them the scientists actually, the men of the Renaissance, they tried to innovate on these, thereby opening up new avenues for medicine or developments in the field of medicine. Now, we find that some people say that the Renaissance was actually backward looking, because it laid great stress on the study of the Greek classics, the various Greek medicine, science, etc., etc., etc. But it was not actually backward looking, because even if you talk about book knowledge, if you talk about the knowledge gathered from books, it actually forms or it gives the sort of a foundation to future development. Now, if you look at, when you talk about the effect of the Renaissance on the development of science, as we had said, that there were two major areas where substantial work was done, which laid the foundations of the scientific development of the 17th century. One was in the realm of anatomy. Now, if you see the 16th century, you know that Copernicus published his book on astronomy, and during this time, a contemporary of Copernicus, who was called Andreas Vesalius, he was Flemish born, he published a book which in short you call the De Fabrica, but the English version of that is 7 books on the structure of the human body. There was this tendency among the princes, among the well-to-do, the wealthy, to gather whether it was vegetable, mineral, or remains of various animals. Certain kings and princes had stipulated places in their courts where they had these collections. And at times you find that these specimens from the animal world or the vegetable world or the mineral world were arranged in such a way so as to have a beneficial, this arrangement was such so that it would benefit the kingdom or the person who actually collected these items. So it was kind of a celestial, influence, which would be got by arranging these minerals or the vegetable remains in a particular sort of way.
Astrology was another area where positions of the celestial objects were accurately noted for the purpose of making accurate horoscopes.
In fact, there was this certain Italian prince who changed his clothes every day of the week according to the colors which ruled the particular planetary position that day. So you can imagine, or you can see that this kind of a belief that the celestial had an effect on the lives of men. And for these things to actually give positive result, one had to have a very thorough knowledge of astrology. One had to have a very thorough knowledge of minerals. One had to have a very thorough knowledge of the animal and the plant world. This helped in the development of of chemicals. If you look at the German princes, you will see that specifically because Germany was torn by internecine warfares among the various German princes, a knowledge of maps was very important. And to get a correct map, the knowledge of mathematics was very important. So you find that mathematics was propagated not because the princes actually wanted to patronize mathematics, but for something which had a very utilitarian value. They wanted a map which would give them a correct, sort of sense of the territory that they ruled.
Mathematics was not only perceived as a handy tool, but it also began to be accepted as fundamental to our understanding of nature. Galileo wrote in his book Saggiatore, "Philosophy is written in this grand book, I mean the universe, which stands continually open to our gaze. But it cannot be understood unless one first learns to comprehend the language. It is written in the language of mathematics."
Process which was started by Copernicus reached its fruition under Galileo Galilei with the discovery of the telescope. With the discovery of the telescope, the celestial world or the interpretation of the celestial world became easier. Something which Kepler drew upon later, something where previously it was believed, according to Aristotle or the Aristotelian tradition, that everything moved in a circular motion. But it was not so. Kepler for the first time said that the earth moved in an elliptical motion. In fact, all heavenly bodies or the bodies in the universe moved in an elliptical motion.
ম্যাম, আমরা কি বলতে পারি যে এই রেনেসাঁসের সময় যে মানবতাবাদী দর্শনের একটা উদ্ভব হচ্ছে, তার ফলে যে ওই ব্যক্তিকেন্দ্রিক একটা জগতের ধারণা ক্রমশ প্রবলতর হচ্ছে, সেটাই বিজ্ঞানের নতুন ভিত্তি নির্মাণ করে দিয়েছিল?
The stress on anatomy, in fact, is an offshoot of humanism, where the world is moving away from a God-centric world to a man-centric world. The human body is so very important. The human being is so very important. It is not only what the man does, but also the way the man is actually made. And even in Christianity, there's a belief that man is made like God, in the image of God. If that is so, you have to understand, or you have to understand the physical attributes of man to understand the physical attributes of God. So that is why you have these dissections, so that each and every part of the human body is analyzed, is understood, and the best representation of this is seen in the art of this period. You will find the best human figures being coming up during the Renaissance, precisely because man has a thorough knowledge of the human anatomy, something which is not based only on book knowledge, something which is acquired through dissection of human cadavers.
ম্যাম, বিজ্ঞান বিপ্লব বলতে আমরা মূলত বুঝি একটা মানে ধর্ম বিযুক্ত একটা যুগ দর্শন, কিন্তু এই রেনেসাঁসের সময় থেকে কি যারা বৈজ্ঞানিক আবিষ্কার করছে, মানে অ্যারিস্টটল আর টলেমিকেই যদি আমরা ধরি, তাহলে কি তারা ধর্ম থেকে বিজ্ঞানকে আলাদা করতে পারছিল?
Scientific revolution is antithetical to religion, if you want to say that. Then to an extent they were questioning the authority of God. The moment you try to find answers to questions rationally, you are actually challenging the authority of God. Because previous to the Renaissance, if you talk about the influence of the Catholic Church on the people, one of the major reasons as to why the Catholic Church faced various problems later on was because of the fact that they were misrepresenting God. Now, they could misrepresent God. Why? Because there was no rationality in the thought process. You did not question any authority. Where science is concerned, you are questioning the authority of a non-perceivable object. God is actually something which is not apparent. God is something which is actually a creation of the mind. It's a belief. It defies rational thinking. That is, it is guided by faith. But in science, there's nothing called faith. It's rationality. It's experimentation, observation, and result. But at one time, specifically by the time you come to say Kepler and later, even say Galileo Galilei, he was tried, he was imprisoned, but then he was also freed, and he defended himself. He defended himself by saying or by proving that the sun was the epicenter of the universe. And the church realized that this was being proven by reason, and they could not actually question that. They could not actually go beyond that. So they even accepted it. The church realized, the ecclesiastical bodies realized, that there were certain compromises that they would have to make. But at no time do you see religion getting completely divorced from science, because there was some kind of a compromise somewhere.
ম্যাম, বিজ্ঞান বিপ্লবকে যদি আমরা বিপ্লব হিসেবে দেখি, তাহলে দেখব যে এটা একটা মানে একটা নির্দিষ্ট বৈজ্ঞানিক শ্রেণীর মধ্যে সীমাবদ্ধ। সাধারণ মানুষকে কি এটা কোনোভাবে প্রভাবিত করেছিল?
This is something that we actually alluded to before. And I said that the developments of science, to become applicable to the masses, would take a long time. In fact, if you look at the 17th century, then only will you see that the first developments occurred where? In the field of navigation, where with the coming of the compass. Why? Because these would help the geographical discoveries. So this did have a kind of an utilitarian value. You're talking about the utility of science. By the time you come to the 17th century, you do have the development of instruments, which first you see, you have Boyle coming up with the laws of vacuum and gas, which ultimately which ultimately results in the discovery of the steam power in the next century, that is the 18th century. So developments were being made. For them to be actually beneficial to the mass of the people would take a little longer. But it does not mean to say that scientific developments were not utilitarian. It would have to have a utilitarian value. Otherwise, you could not have a revolution. One must conclude by saying that the Renaissance, the developments during the Renaissance, had so long been termed, or historians had called it differently, something called the bad science and the good science. But there is nothing like the bad science or the good science. Both these sciences are equally, in fact, if they exist at all, both these sciences are equally relevant and important, or were equally relevant and important for the development of scientific knowledge, which actually reached its climax during the 17th century.
The Aristotelian scientific tradition had believed in observation under natural circumstances. Experiments were considered as contrivances, which at best revealed ununiversal facts about nature in an artificial state. Aristotle believed in a deductive approach. Francis Bacon, on the other hand, believed in an inductive approach to nature. He saw the virtue of experimentation under controlled circumstances. Under the influence of scientists and philosophers like Bacon, an empirical tradition was developed by the 16th century. The Aristotelian belief in natural and artificial circumstances was abandoned. A research tradition of systematic experimentation was slowly accepted. Mechanists like René Descartes rejected all goals, emotion, and intelligence in nature. In this view, the world was fundamentally inert, driven by a set of physical laws. At the end of the scientific revolution, the qualitative world of book-reading philosophers had been changed into a mechanical, mathematical world to be known through experimental research.